The man who walks to the graveyard while asleep. Real horror story. Every town has secrets buried deeper than the graves in its oldest cemetery. Some secrets walk after midnight, guided by forces that should never wake. This true horror story follows a man who sleepwalks to a place the living fear and the dead wait. Watch closely and never sleep alone. Elias Hartman lived a quiet existence in a small town that rarely made the news and never boasted about anything except the aging cemetery that sat on a hill overlooking every street. Elias was not unusual by any means. He worked at a modest printing shop, bought the same groceries every week, and maintained polite conversations with neighbors. Yet there was one thing that set him apart: he sleepwalked. It started in his early 20s, harmless at first, little midnight wanderings from his bed to the couch, harmless and forgettable. Years passed, and the sleepwalking remained an occasional inconvenience until it began evolving into something far stranger. Elias started waking up in places he did not recognize. First it was the living room, then the porch, and then outside entirely, his bare feet covered in dew and dirt. He began sleeping less, terrified that each night might take him farther away. He set alarms, drank coffee late into the evening, but exhaustion always dragged him into unconsciousness eventually. When he slept, his legs carried him farther than he could ever recall. His house stood only 3 blocks from the town cemetery, a vast patch of land filled with graves older than any living memory. Faded names and eroded dates stretched in every direction beneath rotting trees. The townspeople seldom spoke about the cemetery with any comfort. They passed stories quietly, muttering about restless dead and unmarked graves. Elias ignored their superstitions, dismissing them as folklore. But the cemetery was becoming a fixture in his mornings. One morning, Elias awakened on the front steps, shivering in the gray dawn, clutching a wilting flower. The next, he discovered soil caked beneath his fingernails and a small scrap of funeral pamphlet in his pajama pocket. He kept telling himself it meant nothing. Maybe he had wandered near the graveyard on some unconscious route. But denial grew harder to maintain each time he found new evidence that he had been there again. His co-workers noticed changes. Elias was losing weight. His cheeks were hollowing. His eyes carried the look of someone haunted by thoughts he could not voice. In quiet moments, his breath would quicken for no reason at all, and a cold sweat coated his palms. Some mornings he struggled to remember what he had done the day before, as though sleepwalking was consuming the hours he lived awake. Desperation made him attempt solutions that bordered on absurd. He locked his bedroom door each night, yet woke to find it ajar and the key placed neatly on his nightstand. He pushed heavy furniture in front of the entryway, only to discover it carefully returned to place while he wandered outside. He tied a string from his wrist to the bed, expecting a jolt to wake him, but instead found the string perfectly untied by morning. His nighttime actions were not clumsy or confused. They were precise. Nightmares began to plague him. He would wake with a scream choking inside his throat, having no memory of what frightened him. His heart pounded violently, and his skin felt colder than the air around him. He could sense something standing near him, though he never saw anything when he opened his eyes. He felt watched, studied, and summoned. One evening, driven by fear he could no longer ignore, Elias set up a camera in his living room aimed at the hallway and his front door. If he sleepwalked again, he would see exactly what was happening. He fell asleep reluctantly, and the next morning, dread forced him to review the footage. The video showed him entering the frame just after midnight. His body swayed stiffly, and his head hung unnaturally low, chin nearly touching his chest. Suddenly, he snapped upright with a jerk, his face turning toward the camera though his eyes were closed. His arms dangled like dead branches, yet his steps were steady and sure. He approached the front door and stopped. For several minutes, he stood unmoving, as if listening. Then, slowly, his head tilted to the side, like a puppet receiving instruction. Elias replayed the footage repeatedly, searching for some sign of dreamlike confusion, but the image remained the same, a body guided by intention, not sleep. His stomach knotted with sickness. He had no memory of any of it. The following night he attempted to stay awake, pacing the floor until exhaustion overcame him and he collapsed on the couch. Darkness swallowed him instantly. Morning came in a flash, and he awakened outside, lying in damp grass. Frost coated his hair and clothes. The chill bit into his bones. As he sat up trembling, he finally realized where he was: the cemetery. The towering iron gate loomed just behind him, open wide. He stood shakily, scanning the endless rows of gravestones, trying to recall anything from the night before. Nothing came. But his fist clenched something, and when he opened his hand, he saw a small stone with dirt smudged across one side. He wiped it clean and stared at the name etched into it: Hartman. His own last name. Blood roared in his ears as fear rooted him in place. He searched frantically among the stones nearby, stepping deeper into the cemetery until he found what he dreaded most: a grave bearing his full name, Elias Hartman. The stone was cracked with age, the lettering faint but unmistakable. The grave did not look newly carved. It looked ancient, as though it had always belonged to him. He wandered deeper through the gravestones, driven by a fearful urge to uncover answers his waking mind rejected. Symbols carved into stones seemed older than language. The grass felt colder here, as if warmth avoided the soil. His heart pounded when he realized he had reached a forgotten part of the cemetery, untouched and hidden from visitors. The uneven ground should have tripped him, yet his sleepwalking steps were always steady. Something knew this place well and was guiding him directly to it. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Elias drifted through hours like a ghost wearing a living man's skin. Every reflection he caught, mirrors, windows, polished surfaces, seemed slightly delayed, as if his reflection lagged behind, reluctant to mimic him. People spoke to him, yet he heard their voices as distant murmurs beneath a deeper, whispering echo only he could perceive. When he closed his eyes even for a second, he saw flashes of moonlit headstones, soil shifting, and roots twisting beneath cold earth, as if trying to remember where his feet had been. When he finally reached home that night, he locked every door and window, though he knew locks no longer mattered. He sat awake for hours, too afraid to blink. He told himself he would resist sleep at any cost. But as the night grew colder, his eyes betrayed him. Fatigue pressed his body into stillness. He tried to convince himself that stress explained everything, that his mind was inventing horrors to justify his exhaustion. But deep inside, he knew the truth was older and darker. Something had claimed him. Something that belonged to the cemetery had recognized him as its own. Every night, his feet carried him closer to a destiny carved in stone long before he was born. And as the sun slipped beneath the horizon each evening, Elias felt the same dread seeping into his bones, the terror that he would soon belong to the dead entirely. His soul seemed tethered to the cemetery's cold heart, pulled by invisible threads. Every falling night promised a deeper step into the darkness, and every dawn felt like borrowed time stolen from the dead. The next evening arrived like a threat. Elias attempted to keep every light on in the house, surrounding himself with reminders of life, as though electricity alone could hold back whatever waited for him in darkness. He drank coffee until his hands shook, paced until his legs ached, and watched the clock crawl through the late hours. But fear was a cruel force, draining him faster than any exhaustion. His eyelids became heavy shutters he could not hold up forever. He sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around him, shaking not from cold but from dread. His thoughts spun in frantic circles, trying to piece together fragments of nightmares and forgotten footsteps. He wondered if he should tell someone, anyone, but the idea of explaining this nightmare out loud made him feel insane. He feared not only disbelief but that speaking it might strengthen whatever lurked behind his nightly wanderings. Just after midnight, he lost the battle. His breathing slowed, his muscles loosened, and sleep slipped over his mind like a dark curtain. Silence filled the house except for the faint sound of wind scraping across the windows. His body rose moments later. There was no hesitation, no confusion. His feet moved as though following a familiar path. The front door unlocked without conscious instruction. The cold night welcomed him like a long-awaited guest. His movements were smooth and purposeful as he stepped outside, guided by an invisible calling rooted deep beneath the earth. He walked toward the cemetery with the grace of someone drawn home. The moonless sky cast everything into a black void, yet he navigated the streets flawlessly. His sleepwalking form showed no fear, no doubt. He moved with the confidence of someone who had always belonged among gravestones. When he reached the cemetery gate, it stood open once again. No rusted hinges creaked. No effort was needed to push it aside. He entered silently, swallowed by darkness. Deep among the graves, his destination waited. In daylight, this part of the cemetery appeared forgotten and untouched. But at night, it breathed. The air felt heavier, thickened with memories of lives long buried. Elias stopped before his own grave. The cracked stone seemed even older under the pale glow of distant starlight. Wind brushed the dying grass as if the earth sighed in anticipation. Then the ground shifted. The soil trembled, subtly at first, like something stirring in its sleep. Elias remained motionless, arms hanging limp. Dirt began to break apart, pushed from below. Roots twitched like veins awakening beneath skin. The earth split open even though no shovel touched it. Something below was rising. Elias's body began to lower itself toward the ground. His knees folded unnaturally, bones bending with mechanical precision. His hands pressed into the cold dirt as he leaned forward, drawn closer to the opening grave. His head tilted down, hair brushing cracked stone like a gesture of recognition. One heartbeat passed. Then another. The ground burst open. A skeletal hand clawed into the air, coated in earth older than memory. Soil poured from ancient joints as another hand emerged, forcing wider the gap between the living and dead. An unseen weight pressed through, as if history itself rose in that moment. Elias did not flinch. The corpse that pulled itself upward was not fresh, nor wholly decayed. Its skin was stretched thin like paper, clinging to bone with desperate defiance. Its mouth gaped open in a silent scream, and its hollow eye sockets stared into nothing. Yet the shape of its jaw, the contour of its skull, there was no denying the resemblance. It was him. Not just a corpse, but a version of Elias that had once lived long before him. Same height, same structure, same name carved into the stone. This was not a coincidence. This was lineage reborn through death. The corpse leaned closer, its form unstable yet driven by purpose. It touched Elias's chest lightly, as if confirming a match. Elias's body leaned too, mirroring the movement, their foreheads nearly touching. Their breaths synchronized, even though one had no lungs left to breathe. A pulse of invisible force surged between them. The corpse's skull tilted upward and a shift began, dirt falling away from bone that slowly gained shape. Skin thickened. Muscles returned. Features sharpened into recognizable form. It was not coming back to life. It was taking. Elias's soul, every beat of his heart, every breath he had left, fed the corpse like water soaking into thirsty ground. He was being emptied so the dead could fill themselves. His spine arched violently as though strings pulled from every direction inside him. His mouth opened, releasing a soundless gasp. His body convulsed while the corpse stood taller, stronger, rejuvenated with every second. The transformation was a grotesque exchange. The living man shriveled while the long-buried corpse stood more solid, more complete. One was fading, the other ascending. When at last the corpse resembled him entirely, alive, breathing, warm, it placed a hand on Elias's forehead, almost gently. Elias's fading eyes locked onto its face, and in that brief moment, awareness returned. Terror burst through him like a final scream inside his skull. But it was far too late. With a swift push, the new Elias forced the former into the open grave. Soil responded like obedient servants, pulling the old body back down into the earth. Elias tried to move, to resist, but nothing obeyed him anymore. Dirt pressed against his limbs, packing tighter around him. His chest burned, desperate for air. His heart thrashed weakly under crushing weight. Above him, the new Elias stood perfectly still, staring downward with a calm expression void of any humanity he once held. His head tilted slowly, displaying curiosity rather than remorse. The earth continued its merciless work, smothering the last remnants of the original Elias Hartman beneath centuries-old roots and forgotten bones. The soil sealed. The grave claimed its rightful resident. The new Elias brushed dirt from his skin, testing his body like someone trying on clothes that fit just right. His movements were smoother now, sharper. There was intelligence in his eyes that Elias had never possessed, something ancient and predatory. He looked toward the town. His town. Then he walked away from the cemetery. He understood the world better than the living ever could. He belonged to the dead, but now he walked among the breathing. He carried every memory of the man he replaced. No one would suspect. No one would run. They would greet him tomorrow like always, never knowing the soul behind the familiar face had rotted long ago. The moonlight followed him back home, and he slipped into bed as the last trace of night faded. When morning arrived, he stretched casually, preparing for another ordinary day. He brushed his teeth, made breakfast, and smiled in the mirror. A smile that belonged to something dead. The day passed uneventfully. He greeted neighbors with a wave. He returned to work, efficiently completing tasks Elias had done 1,000 times. Yet beneath it, a silent hunger thrived. It waited. It planned. The cemetery had returned what was theirs, and the living world would soon understand the cost. Every night, he would go back, not as prey but as predator. Graves would open. The long-buried dead would rise again. One by one, they would replace the living. Soon the town would walk not with hearts, but with soil-filled chests, breathing life stolen from those who once slept peacefully. The first victim had been chosen long before he was born. Now, the dead were awake. And they were not finished. If you ever wake up near a cemetery, don't assume you sleepwalked. Maybe something walked you back. Pray the dead never learn your name, because once a grave claims you, something else will wear your life. Subscribe now, before the earth decides it's your turn to return home.